My wife cheated on me with her boss and lied about a $200, $0 inheritance, then secretly sold our family home behind my back. Now she's suing me for half the proceeds and claiming I'm violent. But I just found out she's been secretly funneling money to her new boyfriend. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where my wife, who always seemed so perfect on the surface, could turn out to be such a complete liar and cheat. The thing is, I had my suspicions for a while, but I never wanted to believe it. Until that night when everything fell apart. The moment I saw her phone screen light up with a message from her boss, Mark, I knew something was wrong. The way she was acting, nervous, overly defensive, sneaking around, those little signs finally made sense. I'd noticed her canceling plans, staying late at work more often, but she'd always come up with some excuse about stress or work emergencies. But that night I caught her. I was snooping, something I normally wouldn't do, but I'd been feeling uneasy for weeks. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to know the truth. I saw her. Phone on the kitchen counter unlocked, and I saw the messages. They weren't just business talk. They were flirtatious, intimate, and downright disgusting. She called him babe, told him she was thinking about him all day, and even mentioned wanting to spend the weekend together. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe I'd been living with a woman who was cheating on me with her boss, a guy I'd always thought was just a decent guy at work. That's when I looked a little deeper. I found receipts from hotel bookings, screenshots of explicit texts, and even a few photos of her in bed with him, completely naked, no shame. It was like someone had punched me in the gut. I felt a mix of rage, heartbreak, and utter disbelief. How could she lie to me all this time? How could she pretend to be this loving wife, the mother of our kids, while secretly screwing her boss and probably much more? I was furious, but I also felt a crushing sadness that I'd been so blind, so trusting. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I took a step back. I needed proof, something concrete. I started digging through her emails, bank accounts, and even her social media. That's when I uncovered even more. Turns out she'd been lying about a supposed inheritance, claimed she inherited $200, $0 from her grandmother, which she never showed me. She told her friends she was set for life, but I knew better. I found bank statements showing she'd been funneling money into secret accounts, money she was hiding from me. And then I discovered the biggest shock. She'd already sold our family home behind my back, moved the money into her new boyfriend's account, and was now planning to sue me for half the proceeds. The worst part, I found out she'd been lying about everything, about her inheritance, her job stress, her loyalty. She'd been sneaking around, lying, manipulating, all while pretending to be the perfect wife and mother. I felt betrayed, crushed, and honestly, I was furious. I didn't know what to do next. I wanted to confront her immediately, but I knew I needed a plan. I couldn't just blow up and scream at her. I needed to think clearly, to understand what her game was and how I was going to get even. That night I sat alone in the dark, staring at her phone and those messages, realizing I'd been played for a fool. I kept asking myself, how long has this been going on? How much of my life was a lie? I was angry at her, but I was also hurt. Deep down, I felt like I'd lost the woman I thought I knew. But I also knew I couldn't let her get away with it, not without a fight. I had to figure out my next move, and I knew from that moment on, everything was going to change. After I spent the night piecing everything together, I knew I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. The shock was slowly turning into a burning rage. I had to confront her, but I also had to be smart about it. I didn't want her to get wind of what I knew before I was ready. Was the type to spin stories, deny everything, and manipulate her way out of trouble. But I wasn't going to let her do that anymore. Not after what I found. The next morning, I waited until she left for her. Work emergency, a phrase I'd heard way too often. Lately, I wanted to catch her in the act if she was planning to come home and lie her way out of what I'd uncovered. I sat in the living room, going through her emails again, making sure I had every piece of evidence I needed. I took screenshots of her messages with Mark, downloaded her bank statements, and even printed out some of the receipts. I was building a case, not just to confront her, but to understand exactly how deep her lies went. When she finally came home that afternoon, she looked tense, like she'd been running from something. She tried to act normal, but I saw right through her. I sat her down on the couch and looked her straight in the eyes. "I know about the affair," I said calmly but firmly. Her face froze and her eyes darted around like she was trying to find an escape route. She blinked rapidly and started to deny everything, calling it a mistake, a moment of weakness, and claiming Mark was just a mentor she admired at work. She even had the nerve to say I was overreacting, that I was paranoid, and that I was the one cheating all along. That last part made my blood boil. I laid out the evidence I had, her explicit texts, the hotel receipts, the photos, the bank statements showing the secret accounts. I told her I knew about her lying about the inheritance, about selling the house behind my back, and about funneling money to her new boyfriend, Jake. Her face turned red, then pale. She tried to spin it to blame me for not trusting her, and said I was crazy for accusing her of all this. But I didn't care about her excuses anymore. I just wanted her to face what she'd done. She finally broke down, crying and screaming, claiming she was just bored, that I was never enough, and that she deserved to be happy. She told me she'd been secretly seeing Jake for months, and that she'd lied about everything because she didn't want me to know she was leaving. She said she was tired of the boring life we had, that she wanted something exciting, and that I was just too blind to see her real needs. Her words felt like knives, but I was too numb to feel much anymore. I knew I had to act, but I didn't want to just lose my temper. I kept my voice steady, telling her she was done, that I was done with her lies, and that I wasn't going to let her ruin everything I built. As I listened to her ramble on about her supposed freedom, I felt a strange mixture of rage and sadness. I'd loved her once. I'd trusted her with my life. But now I saw her for what she truly was, a manipulative, selfish woman who only cared about herself. I realized I'd been living in a fantasy, thinking our marriage was perfect, when she'd been secretly planning her escape. The betrayal cut deep, but I also knew I had to get out of this mess and take control. I told her she needed to leave that day. I wanted her out of my house, out of my life, and I didn't want her to think she could manipulate her way back in. That confrontation was just the beginning. I knew I had a lot more to do. I had to figure out how to protect myself legally, how to recover what I could from the house she sold without my knowledge, and how to deal with her suing me for half the proceeds. But more than that, I had to come to terms with the fact that my marriage was over, that the woman I loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who only cared about her own selfish needs. The pain was overwhelming, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I finally saw her for what she was, a liar, a cheat, and a user. And I was done being a victim. I was going to fight for what was mine. After left that day, I felt like I was walking through a fog. Everything was spinning: her lies, her betrayal, the house sold behind my back, the inheritance she lied about, and the secret money funneling to Jake. I knew I couldn't just sit there and let her walk away with everything she'd stolen or manipulated. I had to get my head straight and come up with a plan. First thing was to protect myself legally. I reached out to a lawyer that afternoon, one who specialized in divorce and asset protection, and explained everything. The lawyer was surprised, but said I had a lot of evidence to build a strong case. The house sale, the bank accounts, the inheritance lie, they all worked in my favor if I played it right. In the meantime, I started digging into her financial stuff more thoroughly. I wanted to see exactly how much she'd taken, where the money went, and how much I was owed. I discovered she'd been transferring money to Jake's account for months, small amounts at first, then larger sums. Apparently, she'd been funneling money through multiple accounts, making it hard to trace, but I found a trail. She'd also been secretly buying luxury items, designer clothes, jewelry, even expensive gadgets, using the money from the sale of our house in her secret accounts. I was stunned. How much had she stolen? How far had she gone? As I pieced it all together, I realized I needed to confront her again, but this time with my lawyer present. I didn't want her to manipulate or gaslight me anymore. I wanted the truth on record. So I scheduled a meeting, and when she came back that evening, I told her I knew everything. I told her I had proof of her affair, her secret accounts, her selling the house and funneling money to Jake. Her face twisted with rage and denial. She started claiming I was lying, that I was paranoid, and that she was just trying to make a new life. She called me controlling, accused me of being violent, something she'd said before to turn the tables, and insisted she was the victim. That's when I told her I was done playing her game. I said I was going to take her to court, get a fair settlement, and make sure she paid for her lies. I also told her she'd be held accountable for her betrayal, especially the affair with Mark and Jake. She scoffed, then tried to guilt-trip me, saying I was a terrible husband, that I'd driven her to this, and that she only did what she did because I was boring and unkind. I felt a deep simmering anger. I was furious she'd try to twist everything around, but I also knew I had to stay calm. I wanted her to see that I was serious, that I wasn't going to let her get away with destroying my life. Over the next few days, I gathered more documents, contacted a forensic accountant to trace the money, and prepared for what was coming. I was determined to fight for my rights, for the house, and for the inheritance that she'd lied about so blatantly. I also started thinking about how to protect myself emotionally. I was hurt, betrayed, and angry, but I knew I had to keep my head clear. I couldn't let her manipulate me into doing something I'd regret. I decided to focus on the facts, keep my emotions in check, and get everything in order before taking the next step. Meanwhile, was trying to spin her story to friends and family, painting herself as the victim, saying I'd become violent and controlling, that I'd hit her or raised my hand once or twice. That made my blood boil. I knew I'd never laid a finger on her, but she was good at twisting things. I kept quiet about the details, letting my lawyer handle the legal side. But I couldn't stop feeling the sting of her lies, the way she'd turned my life upside down. Every time I thought I'd reached the bottom, I'd find another layer of her deception. It was like peeling an onion, each layer worse than the last. I kept asking myself, how did it all go so wrong? How did I miss all the signs? I had built a life with her, a family, a future. And now it felt like that was nothing but a house of cards ready to collapse. Still, I was determined not to let her win. I was going to stand up, fight for what was rightfully mine, and make sure she paid for her betrayal. I knew revenge wasn't just about getting the money or the house back. It was about reclaiming my dignity and moving on. I was done being the victim. From here on, I'd be the one in control. The legal process moved quickly once I handed everything over to my lawyer. She was ruthless and sharp, and she told me I had a solid case to contest the sale of the house, especially since hadn't told me about it beforehand. That was a huge blow. Our family home, the place I thought was our sanctuary, sold behind my back for her own gain. I still couldn't believe she'd do something so cold and calculating. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep her deception went. One afternoon, showed up unexpectedly at my office, her face flushed and eyes darting around. She tried to act innocent, but it was obvious she was panicked. She begged me to drop the lawsuit to work things out, claiming she'd made mistakes but still loved me. She said she was sorry for everything, that she'd change, that she just wanted to keep the family together. I stared at her, cold and detached, and told her that I wasn't interested in her sob stories anymore. I told her I knew about her affair with Mark and Jake, about the inheritance lie, and about selling the house. I said I was going to fight for my rights, for the house, and for the money she'd stolen. She tried to guilt me, saying I was breaking up the family, that I was overreacting, and that I was controlling. But I cut her off. I told her she'd lost that privilege. She'd lost my trust, and she'd lost her chance to manipulate me anymore. I warned her that I was prepared to take everything she'd taken from me, her assets, her lies, her reputation, and make her pay. That day I felt a strange sense of clarity. I was finally taking control, no matter how much it hurt. The legal battles weren't easy. Hired her own lawyer, and suddenly it was all about court dates, depositions, and subpoenas. She fought hard, claiming I was violent, that I'd threatened her, and that I was unstable. She even tried to use her accusations of violence to get a protective order. I knew she was lying. She'd always been good at spinning stories to turn everyone against me. But I had witnesses, our neighbors, friends who saw her sneaking around, and my own account of her aggressive behavior during our confrontations. I kept my cool, played it smart, and let my lawyer handle her lies. Meanwhile, I also uncovered more about the money she'd been funneling to Jake. It wasn't just a few $100s here and there. It was thousands. She'd even set up a new bank account under a fake name, using some of the inheritance she'd lied about, and deposited the money there. She'd been planning her escape for months, maybe even longer. I found encrypted emails between her and Jake discussing their plans, their future together, and how she'd get rid of me once she had the money in the house. It was sickening. I felt a mixture of disgust and rage. How could she do this to us? To me? To our kids? The most shocking part was her attempt to sue me for half the sale of the house. She claimed I'd abused her, that I was violent, hopping to get a bigger settlement. That was so far from the truth I almost laughed. But I knew I had to defend myself, not just for my sake, but for my reputation. I gathered more witnesses, more evidence, and prepared to fight her in court. I also hired a forensic accountant to trace every dollar she'd stolen or hidden. It was clear she'd been planning her escape for a long time, and I wasn't going down without a fight. All the while, I was trying to process the emotional wreckage. I'd loved once. I'd trusted her with everything. Now, I was left with nothing but betrayal and a mountain of legal mess. I kept replaying the moments when I first noticed her distance, the small signs I ignored, the times I dismissed my gut feeling. I felt stupid for trusting her so blindly, but I also knew I had to move forward. I couldn't let her destroy me emotionally, even if she'd tried. I had to be stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever. I started to realize that revenge wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about proving that I was not a fool, that I wasn't going to be manipulated anymore. I was going to make her regret every lie, every betrayal. I was going to take back what was mine and rebuild my life from the ashes of her deception. It was a long road ahead, but I was ready to fight for it. The court hearings were a nightmare, but they also clarified a lot. Lies, her manipulations, her attempts to paint herself as the victim, all of it was laid bare. I had more than enough evidence to counter her claims of violence and abuse. My lawyer made sure to emphasize her financial deceit, the sale of the house behind my back, and the money she'd been funneling to Jake. It was clear she'd been planning her escape for months, maybe longer. Her stories about being bored or unhappy didn't hold water anymore. She was just a woman desperate to cut and run, using every trick she could think of. During the court sessions, tried everything to sway the judge, accusations of violence, claiming I'd threatened her, even trying to get a restraining order based on her fabricated stories. But I had witnesses, neighbors who saw her sneaking around late at night, friends who knew about her affair, and the digital trail that proved she'd been lying. My lawyer presented all of it, and slowly her case crumbled. The judge saw through her stories, and I could tell she was panicking. Meanwhile, I also discovered she'd been secretly transferring money from her accounts to Jake's, sometimes under fake names, sometimes through third-party accounts. I found encrypted emails where she discussed their plans, how she'd leave me, get rid of the house, and start fresh with Jake. It was disgusting. She planned this entire betrayal for months, maybe years, and I was only just learning the full extent of her deception. The biggest blow was when the court finally ruled on the sale of the house, had tried to claim half the proceeds, even though she'd secretly sold it without telling me. The judge was clear. Since she didn't have my consent and had hidden the sale, she wasn't entitled to any of the money. The court ordered her to pay me back for the amount she'd stolen, plus interest, and to cease any further claims on the inheritance she'd lied about. It was a small victory, but it felt like a massive weight lifted. I finally saw some justice in this mess, but the emotional toll was worse than the legal battles. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and broken. I kept asking myself how I'd missed all the signs, how I'd been so blind to her lies. I wondered if I'd ever trust anyone again. The pain of realizing that the woman I loved had been using me, cheating on me, and planning her escape was almost too much to bear. I spent nights awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to process it all. I felt like I was drowning in anger, sadness, and frustration. Still, I knew I had to focus on rebuilding my life. The house was gone, my marriage was over, and I had lost a lot of money and trust, but I also understood that I was stronger than her lies. I was determined to start over to learn from this nightmare. I had to find a way to forgive myself for trusting her so blindly and to forgive her for what she did. Not for her sake, but for mine. I couldn't carry this hatred forever. I wanted peace, even if it seemed impossible right now. So I began the process of healing. I reached out to friends and family, people who knew the real, not the person she projected to the world. I started therapy to deal with the emotional aftermath. And I made a vow to myself. I would never let someone manipulate me like this again. I would be cautious, smarter, and more aware of the signs next time. I'd rebuild my life piece by piece, and I'd do it without her. Because in the end, I realized that revenge isn't just about getting back what's stolen. It's about reclaiming yourself after everything been shattered, and I was finally starting to do that. Looking back now, I see how much everything changed in just a few months. I went from trusting the woman I thought I knew to uncovering a web of lies, betrayal, and greed that I couldn't have imagined. The worst part was realizing how much I'd been blind, how I'd ignored the small signs that pointed to her deception. But the good thing is, I learned something crucial. No matter how much you love someone, you have to protect yourself, your peace, and your boundaries. Trust is earned, not given blindly, especially when someone's hiding secrets. Getting through the legal battles was exhausting, but it also gave me a sense of closure. Seeing her face in court, trying to spin her stories, only to be met with the cold facts, was satisfying in a way. I knew I'd fought for what was rightfully mine, and I'd exposed her for the manipulative person she'd become. The money, the house, the inheritance, all of it was a lesson in how greed and selfishness can destroy even the strongest bonds. It hurt to realize I'd lost so much, but it also freed me from the illusion that I could fix her or that our marriage could somehow survive her betrayal. Now I focus on rebuilding myself. I've cut all contact with. I've moved into new place, started therapy, and am slowly reconnecting with friends and family who supported me through this nightmare. I've learned to be more cautious with who I trust, to listen to my gut, and to value my own well-being over trying to fix something that was already broken beyond repair. Most importantly, I've come to understand that revenge isn't about revenge anymore. It's about justice, about making sure she can't hurt me or anyone else again. I wanted her to feel the consequences of her actions, and I think she does now. At least I hope she does. I hope she's finally realizing that her greed and lies have cost her everything she claimed to want. As for me, I'm finally at peace with the fact that I survived this. I survived her betrayal, her lies, and her manipulations. And I'm stronger now because of it. If I could give anyone advice from this mess, it would be this: trust your instincts. Don't ignore the small signs of deception. And when someone shows you who they truly are, believe them. Because sometimes the truth is the only thing that can set you free. Moving on won't be easy, but it's necessary. You have to take control of your life, even if everything feels like it's falling apart. Because at the end of the day, the only person responsible for your happiness is you. And no matter how deep the betrayal, you can rebuild, better, wiser, and stronger than before.